I share with you what I would do as a teacher and as a mom when it was story time, how you can take the book and really not just read the story, but get them involved in all parts of the story. The title, the back, the bind, the author, the illustrator, having them really dive in. Be expressive when you're reading to them. If you're teaching them a new word in the story, it's okay to pause sometimes and say, what does that mean? Or what does that sound like? Do you know this word or do you recognize this word? Because if you're building a word wall and they're developing all this language, remember by 3, they have hundreds of words. So it's okay to take a break and let them start seeing those words. Use books where the words rhyme. I would have her look at the pictures or sometimes have her turn the pages so that when we're going through the story, she's getting as much out of it as I am. Those are things you can do to make the learning and the reading engaging and exciting. Choose stories about things that they like. If you have a child who's obsessed with dinosaurs, choose a book about dinosaurs. Or you have a child who's obsessed with fashion, everything is fashion. Anything that they are interested in, make sure you have information or books about that. Tell stories about that. Encourage them to use language about that, because that's how you start to build this wonderful world of language around them. One of the things that we all love is to have our voices heard. And when you have someone who doesn't have time to hear your voice, or they just don't want to hear your voice, that can be really hard, especially if you already struggle to communicate. So what we want to do is we want to definitely encourage communication, but one way to do that when we can't have a conversation is to use writing. Writing is another way that they can communicate, and it also helps them enhance their language skills because they're learning more about letters, how they work together, and all the other things that we talked about previously. All right, and we've already talked about different types of technology that you can use. You can use Audible, you can use books on tape, you can use recordings, you can use, even to develop language, there are tools like the big talk button that you can program words in. And for your child who's not verbal, you can have them with the most important words or the most common words, and they can use that to communicate. I've even seen parents of fur babies using this type of technology to communicate with their animals. So I know that this is a great way to expand vocabulary, and I know that it works. If you have a child who's challenged when it comes to writing, have them dictate and then have the screen write for them. And then they can go through and correct what the screen has turned from their voice into a text, talk to text onto the screen. You can use highlighters. I work with children who have visual impairments, and all the words on the screen sometimes are just too much. It's okay. Don't show them all the words. Give them, there are devices we can use that show one sentence at a time so they don't get overwhelmed with everything that's on the page. We are also able now to create stories at different reading levels. So you can have a child who's reading a Shakespearean story, but at their age level. So you can level books and stories so that they're getting this information and building that language. There's so many pieces of technology. Even the cell phone is a piece of technology that can be used to develop language. I have had children who were nonverbal typing into they can text what they need to communicate if talking to a person who doesn't understand ASL or American Sign Language. Okay. So we just as much as possible get those apps, get those but I will caution, because technology is so addictive, our children tend to get into technology and start veering off into other places and using it for other things. Put a time limit on it. Give them a limit to where they can be on the technology, switch it up a lot. Get them used to using other versions of communication and literacy building tools. Okay. All right. All right. So the next thing I want to talk about is our prompting and writing skills. I love to have children, especially when they're really emotional and upset, to write down what's going on. Tell them to use words, use your words. If they can't control the emotions to the point where they're able to articulate with words what they're going through, have them pause and just write it down. Take some quiet time, maybe put on a little bit of music, and have them start to articulate through the words. And then I would also have them read it back to me. Tell me what you wrote on your paper. And then if I had questions as they were writing, as they were reading what they wrote, I would pause and we'd have an expanded conversation about what that was. Give them things to write about that they are really interested in. That's one tool that's a social emotional tool to help calm children down and help them get their feelings out and express the thoughts that they're having. But also, if they are really interested in a topic and they just want to talk, sometimes as parents, you've got dinner going, you've got this going, you've got another child who needs this or that. What you can do is you can take a minute and say, you know what, I really want to hear what you're saying. I want to know more about this. Why don't you just write up a little summary or just write the gist of it down? And then when I finish, you'll remember what you're saying because it's written down and we can go and talk about this later. Or you can have them write about other things that they find interesting. So be encouraging. One of the things that we all love is to have our voices heard. And when you have someone who doesn't have time to hear your voice or they just don't want to hear your voice, that can be really hard, especially if you already struggle to communicate. So what we want to do is we want to definitely encourage communication, but one way to do that when we can't have a conversation is to use writing. Writing is another way that they can communicate. And it also helps them enhance their language skills because they're learning more about letters, how they work together, and all the other things that we talked about previously. Okay. All right. Remember, students who have great literacy and communication skills tend to do better in school across the board. Whew. We have just a few more minutes left, and we have an activity that we're going to wrap up with today. But the last thing that I do want to talk with you about, especially in where I live, being multilingual is very common. I have so many people even in my neighborhood who speak Spanish, they speak Creole, they have different languages from India and Africa. We have a very diverse population around us. I often talk with parents and they feel like they don't want to teach their children how to speak their native language because it might confuse them when they're trying to learn the English, or they feel the kids sometimes feel embarrassed. You can put a one or two or an emoji in the chat if these are some of the thoughts that how many people here are bilingual? I'm just curious about that. Put a Y, a yes in the chat if you're a person who speaks more than one language. Oh, the throwback. I love it. Yes. Haitian, you probably speak Creole. Spanish, I see. Yes. Okay, very good. I'm learning to speak another language. My only language that I'm fluent with is English, but I am learning to speak French. But it is important if you are a person who has more than one language, or you have children who are exposed to more than one language, to make sure they're proud of that. No need to worry about if it's going to impact your child's acquisition of, oh, Hebrew is a hard language, Yadira. Don't worry if knowing more than one language is going to impact your child's ability to communicate. Research shows that children who have more than one language are actually culturally more inept. They have a really broad way of speaking and they can express themselves in all these different languages, which expands their vocabulary of hundreds of words. If you have 100 words in one language and 100 words in another, and those language tends to wrap around and feed off of each other. So they're able to use those words and the different meanings in those words in more ways. The research says that it is good to introduce your child to their native language and another language, your native language and their other language, because it actually enhances their ability to interact and to learn more about how to communicate in the world. If you are concerned about that, or you're concerned that your child is embarrassed about having an accent or speaking different languages, encourage them to be proud of their culture and don't hesitate to teach them the two languages. They'll learn to separate the two when they need to. Okay. All right. So we are coming up on our last 5 minutes of this session. And I know it went by fast. I feel like I was rushing to get through everything, but I hope that you found this very helpful. And I hope that you learned a lot and you got some strategies that you can put into place. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to just go through an activity of things that we've talked about tonight to see if you were listening. I'm just kidding. I just want to share some information with you. So it's fact or fiction. You can pick fact or fiction, and I'll just make sure that you know what the real answer is. Okay? All right. So let me set off the poll for fact or fiction. And then you just pop your answers in there. It's only 6 questions, guys. All right. So as I see you popping your answers in, I will go ahead and start sharing some of the real facts about these questions. Fact or fiction, reading to your young children helps them develop their language and literacy skills. Hey, we've literally been talking about that all night. Everybody should know the answer to that one. I'm just waiting for you to go ahead and fill in some of those answers. And then the next one is fact or fiction. Multilingualism, which we just talked about, in children can lead to language confusion and delays in speech and delays in their literacy and development. Is that true? Let's see. Number 3, children learn language skills and other important skills from stories, like their cultural values or empathy or social skills. Is that true? Fact or fiction? Fact or fiction? Number 4, literacy is reading and writing, not necessarily listening and speaking. And number 5, let's see. Fact or fiction? Technology can be a great tool for supporting literacy and language development in children. But remember, use it sparingly. And then the last one, number 6, is most communication is nonverbal. Is that fact or fiction? Maybe remember that from the very beginning of our talk tonight. All right, we have just about a minute left, so I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results with you. And I'll just let you know. It is true. It is a fact that reading to young children helps them develop their literacy and language. Multilingualism, you don't need to be afraid of that. I just talked to that. It is not going to cause confusion or language delays. It's actually really good for children to learn more than one language at a time. Their minds are like sponges. It's the perfect time. Number 3, children learn language and other important skills from stories. True. Fact. Cultural values and empathy and even social skills can be taught through stories. In fact, they often are, especially in school. Literacy is reading and writing, not listening and speaking. That is false. That's fiction. Literacy is all those things. It's reading, it's writing, it's listening, and speaking. Okay, technology can be a great tool. Yes, it can. That is a fact. However, remember to use it sparingly. And last question, most communication is nonverbal. That's true. That's a fact. 70 to 93% is what the research says. Okay, thank you so much for sharing in that poll and participating. And the last thing I want to do tonight is let you hear your story, and then we'll wrap up.
Good Night Moon by Margaret Wise Brown. In the great green room there was a telephone and a red balloon and a picture of The cow jumping over the moon.
Notice
And there were three little
how the
bears
words are on
sitting
the
on
story,
chairs.
and each picture is pointing to
And
each one of
two
those
little
features.
kittens. And
Developing
a pair
language.
of mittens. And a little toy house. And a young mouse. And a comb. And a brush. And a bowl full of mush. And a quiet old lady who was whispering hush.
Now, if you have a child who's doing an auditory
Good
story,
night, room.
remember you can change the speed.
Good night, moon. Good night, cow jumping over the moon.
And I love how this is a child's voice.
Good
Making the
night,
voice out.
light and the red balloon.
If your story doesn't have words, click
Good
the
night,
captions button.
bears. Good night, chairs.
If you're reading the book
Good
yourself,
night,
point to the words as
kittens.
you go through it.
And good night, mittens. Good night, clocks. And good night, socks. Good night, little house. And good night, mouse.
Okay, I'm going to pause it there. I would let you hear the rest, but we've got to wrap it up. I know people have busy schedules. I want to thank you so much for your time being here tonight. I want you to share with us how you thought this presentation went. Make sure you scan the QR code here and complete a survey so that we know the things that went well or things that we need to work on. And then next time we meet in another couple weeks on May 2nd, we're going to talk about developmental milestones. So we're going to talk about the stages at which your child will reach certain benchmarks and what you need to know so that you can be aware as your child grows and develops. Okay? We're all social media, so definitely reach out to us, follow us. We leave information about trainings there. We leave information that's just helpful information to have. And I want to thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Thank you for joining us. All right.